I'd like to briefly introduce someone who has been in the Edmonton radio scene for many years, and I'm told very accurately, because he told me himself, 45 years in the radio business, and that's Bruce Bowie. Bruce started at 7 years old, in Lloydminster, CKSA, and I haven't got time to mention all the stops, although perhaps not that many stops, with Kissin for 21 years, of course, and 5 happy years with Ched, for a total of 12 actually, but 5 or 6 were happy years. So with no further ado, Bruce.
Greg's, but again, try not to screw it up. I know. Okay, all right. Just told me try not to screw it up. All right, thank you, Craig. So, you saw Sid Smith make it, and you still have your eyesight.
I did.
I did too. Why do you think I still have the job? It all worked out, so it's awesome. Good. All right. Well, it's really nice to see this huge crowd. This is quite a shock, Bob. I had no idea you had this many friends. This is amazing, so it's great. It's really an honor to be here and to be able to introduce Bob today. I was at a function on Saturday night, and I've known this man. I've never met him in person, but I've known him, Sam Abu Hassan, for many years. I finally met him in person, Rob. We talked about your yellow blazer, by the way. He wanted to know if you still wear it. I said, yes, he does, all the time. But Sam was telling me, he said, I think I'm a bit of an anomaly because I've been at the same location, the same business, the same phone number for 40 years. And I said, Sam, come on. Bob Layton, 55 years, same haircut. Nothing. Nothing, and it's true. Back in the 70s, we had hair down to our shoulders, down our back, some of us, and Bob, it eventually came back into style. So, but the thing that really ticks me off is none of it, he's lost none of it, none of it's changed color. So I don't know what you've got going on there, Bob, but it's something that's working for you anyway. I first met Bob when I came to work at Ched in 74. We were reminiscing about old times at our table there. And it was just, for me, a young guy coming to work at Ched, I was just a nervous wreck to be able to come to that station, but to meet the legends and breathe the same air. And Bob Layton was certainly one of those. I remember one of the first rating books that came out, and it was one of those ones that just killed. And I was congratulating Wes Montgomery on his great morning ratings. He said, no, he said, it's not me. And he was quite serious. He said, we had some real struggles until we brought Bob Layton in to do the news, and then suddenly the numbers went up. Everybody wanted to hear Bob do the news. And he still carries me to this day, so it's a true story. If Bob, I don't know if Bob's going to leave. He's on the same retirement plan as Brian Hall. Somebody sent a text to me just a couple of days ago, it's a true story, and said they could see the epitaph on my gravestone. It's going to say, I'm Bruce Bowie, I'm dead, here's Brian Hall with the sports. And that's going to happen. But I do know that if Bob leaves, and I'm sorry, Sid and Tim Spellis, it's going to take like 3, 4, 5 guys to replace what he does as one person. He's just an amazing workhorse. He's selling books here today. You'll want to get one because your name may be in it. It's a great book. You'll want to find out. I had a chance to read it yesterday. I got mine for free, by the way. Radio guy. Bob's always been good to me, and his wife Mark is here, who is carrying his books in for him, by the way. I noticed when I pulled up. How do you do that, Bob? Anyway, they've been so good to me when we got our 2 boys. Mark gave us some quilts that we still have, by the way, in a closet at home, Mark. So thank you for those. They're a little short for me, but they're great memories, great keepsakes. I thought I'd get introduced, Bob, but I don't really, because I received an email from Doug Rutherford, our former general manager, and he wondered if he could just have something to say. He's unable to be here today, but he wanted to pass this along, so I printed it off. And it's true here, he says, the most durable format in Canadian radio is news talk. It sets the agenda for public debate and discussion. It informs and reflects 24 hours a day. It talks of great achievements and terrible disasters. It's the tortoise and the hare of Canadian radio. News talk plays the role of a tortoise, always moving forwards at a steady pace, while other formats and radio concepts come and go, and in some cases come back again. Then Doug says, when I took over the operation of Power 92 and 630 Ched in 93, Bob Layton had already served Ched and the market for decades. And then we changed Ched to News Talk December 1st, 93. Bob responded to the new format with true professionalism. Ched has survived the past almost 25 years because it constantly encourages storytellers. News Talk thrives because of these storytellers, people who can take a story and share it with an audience in an interesting, understandable, and compelling way. Bob is a remarkable storyteller. He writes and he directs and he composes with great accuracy. Although I may be responsible for tempering Bob's on-air version of murder, his broadcast performance is as professional today as it was decades ago when Ched came out of the Top 40 format. He goes on to say it's no surprise that Bob would write a book about his experiences and the people that he encouraged through the years. Great storytellers just have to keep telling stories. So let's hear some. Would you please welcome Bob Layton?
Thank you. Yes, when we switched over to News Talk, and Doug came into the room at the time, and we were at the bottom of the ratings, and he came in and he said, hang on to your hats because we're going to go from worst back up to respectable ratings. And I said, how do you think you're going to do that? I said, our audience is gone. They're listening to music on FM. AM stations are struggling right across the country. How are you going to take us back to the top? And he said, we'll give them a reason to listen. And then he said, and Bob, you'll be doing news every 15 minutes in rush hour. And I said, nobody does news every 15 minutes. And he said, well, you will. And I said, He said, oh, and that murder, that has to go. He says, the audience is growing up, you have to grow up. And I went and saw him in his office after, and I said, you know, you're sort of sucking all of the fun out of this. And maybe this is not what I want to do. And he said, oh, I want you to keep all the comments. I just want you to put them in one place. You're going to start doing editorials. And I said, what? He said, yes, I want 5 editorials on my desk for Monday morning. Let's see what you've got. And so that's how that all started, doing those editorials. I just thought I'd jump in there because that's where Bruce left it. But let me roll you back to 1965. I'm walking a picket line outside the main post office in Calgary. We're on strike. I am not happy with the news coverage. I don't like the way the reporters are telling our story. I'm saying to the other guys on the picket line, I sure wish I was a news reporter so I could tell it like it is. On the weekends, I had a part-time job as a security guard. And so I would sit there all night listening to the radio, listening to a DJ say, and now this song is going out to all the overnight workers, the police, the fire, doctors, nurses, and bakers. And I said, and? Security guards? No. How bright do you have to be a DJ? I could be a DJ. What the heck is going on? And so that was 1965, and I was wishing I was in radio in Calgary. Up the highway in Edmonton in 1965, Jerry Forbes and Keith James putting together a top 40 radio station. They'd already hired a guy named Al Anderson. They got an audition tape from a guy in Dayton, Ohio. This guy had already been fired from 2 radio stations, and he needed to get out of this one. And they got an audition tape that he said they'd give him a chance. His name was Bob McCord. Al Anderson is doing a show. He's got 1 commercial in his entire show. And he didn't want people to think he had no sponsors, so he made up fake commercials to run in his show. Now here's how small a world it is. Now I take you to Fort St. John, radio station CKNL. Bob Layton, first job, and Len Tucson, first job, and we were making up fake commercials put in our show. The boss went away to Edmonton for a few days, and he said, don't be getting in any trouble. We had nothing much to do, and there was a lot of inventory, so we were writing fake commercials. We liked the commercial for the pocket fisherman. We liked that they said you could send $6.95 and wait 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. We thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if people would send us money? We're making $300 a month. And we came up with this commercial for Little Tiny Uglies. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got to have a Little Tiny Ugly. People say if you put them under the bed, mice won't come near it. They say if you put a Little Tiny Ugly on top of your refrigerator, milk will last longer. Ladies, if you keep a Little Tiny Ugly on your dresser while you're putting on your makeup, you will meet the right man that day. Send $3.95 to this radio station, wait 4 to 6 weeks for delivery. And we ran this thing, and we ran it a lot. And after about 3 days, the boss, Mel Stevenson, comes back. Comes into the station, he says, wow, who's the new sponsor? Who's this Little Tiny Uglies? And Len and I explained what we were doing. We were just, practicing. He lost it. He was like the coach. He lost it. He went up one side of us and down the other. He hollered at us, this is fraud. You've advertised a product you don't even have. You've asked for money. You're blah, 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 blah. When he got finished, he did say, the production was pretty good. But don't ever do this again. What do you suppose happened the next day? Money started coming in. People wanted Little Tiny Uglies. 6 orders the first day. So we go to Mel, we're pretty cocky. Hey, Mel, 6 orders, man. Commercials were good. He said, well, what are you going to do now? He said, well, we're going to send them a letter thanking them for taking part in our radio station advertising experiment, and we'll send the money and say thanks very much. And Mel said, no, you won't. You'll send them a Little Tiny Ugly. We said, no, Mel, they don't exist. And he said, they must exist. I heard them on this very radio station. And you'll have one on my desk within 2 days, or you two guys will be gone. Well, now what do you do? So I go home to my wife, who is a crafts person, and confess my sins, and she says, well, what do they look like? She says, well, then they could look like anything. Yeah? So off we go to this sort of combination junk shop, hobby shop. She finds a little resin ball, was supposed to be part of a bunch of grapes. And then she hunted around, she found some little movable eyes, and she glued those on, and she glued a little hat on it, and put some pipe cleaners on for legs, and she said, could that be a Little Tiny Ugly? And we said, why not? She put it on the counter, and it fell over, because it was too heavy for the legs. They had to be fastened somehow, so we ripped off a chunk of cardboard and glued it to the cardboard, and it stood up just fine. But you couldn't send that up. This is a quality product. This is $3.95. You can't send that. We've got to find a base of some kind. And it occurred to us that in the corner of the radio station, there was a huge container full of 45 RPM records that people would send us that hoped to get played, that never got played. So I went back and took a look, and the one on the top had been in the sun, and it was warped. So we put the Little Tiny Ugly on a warped record, and it was perfect. But there's only one warped record. Mark says, well, bring some home. So we get to the house. Len and I walk into my apartment. There's Marg standing there. The door of the oven is open. She's standing there with a pair of tongs in her hand. And Len says, how much trouble are we in? She takes a record, puts it in the oven. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Warped records. So we made these 6, send them out, and then more orders started coming in. We ended up with a production line in my apartment making a Little Tiny, and no two looked the same. It was whatever we could find. We're setting out to people. Finally it was over. And we went to Mel and said, okay, it's done. And he said, I hope you learned a lesson. And we said, well, actually, Mel, we did learn a lesson, man. After we've paid for all the stuff, we got $50 left over. And for us, that was a nice piece of change, $50. Mel was not impressed. He looked at his wife Ann and says, how much airtime did they use up? Uh-oh. It was $200. He said, take it off their checks. And we just choked for a while, and then he let us choke. He said, oh, we could give it to the Red Cross, and we'll call it a promotion. So we did that. And so those were the types of things that we learned in that small market. The other thing that happened in Fort St. John that will stay with me forever was that was the place where the reality of radio hit me, because it was all fun. It was a year of fun. Len and I just had a ball with everything that we were doing. And we also had something to do every day, 4 times a day. It was called message time, because in the area around Fort St. John, people were homesteading. If they could clear the land, put a cabin on it, it was yours. And so 4 times a day, ladies and gentlemen, CKNL to CFNL, 500 miles of the Alaska Highway, it's message time. And people would bring their messages, put them in a basket on the door, and we'd do all the messages, which were pretty mundane. You know, to the Johnson family, your tractor parts are in. To the Smiths, it's a boy. And then came the day that a young native girl came in and put a message in the basket, and when I looked at that, I didn't want to read that on the air. I put it on the bottom of the pile, hoping it would show up later, but finally it was there, and I had to read this on the air, and it said, "To all the people at the Blueberry Reserve, we stood by the road all night. No one would give us a ride. The baby died." And that sort of stopped me in my tracks right there, and I had to have a long talk with Mel and say, I don't know, this is it. And he explained to me that as a broadcaster, you've got a duty to the community. He said, and over your life, you're going to be telling a lot more things that are going to hurt you a lot more than this, you know, if you're going to stay with it. So we leave Fort St. John. We came within a month of each other to 630 Chad. So we go from a store that's built above the sand store, where everything is so thin we can hear them moving the dresses on racks around in the bottom, to 630 Ched, which is located conveniently near the STD clinic. I explain conveniently in the book. And that's where we learned so many more things about what was going on there and the types of things that were going on in a radio station like 630 Ched. It was a time when the culture was cars and practical jokes. When somebody got a new car, we'd go out into the parking lot and ooh and ah over it. The first day I was there as a news guy, and I'm just a green news guy, they said, okay, your first assignment, get yourself down to Edmonton Motors, pick out a car. I go down, I pick out a Monte Carlo, they put Bob Layton across the door, they put 630 Ched all around it, and that's my car. One day a guy comes to show off his car, and we all go out. I don't recognize the guy. He's got a beautiful convertible. I find out later he's Dr. Larry Stearns, and he's a guy who likes to hang out at Ched because he knows the management, and they play practical jokes on each other. Dr. Stearns even had a thing at the reception desk, the in-out, where it says Medical Director, 630 Ched, Dr. Larry Stearns. And so he's had this beautiful convertible there, and he goes back to the hospital. Our management people, Jerry Forbes, Jim McLaughlin, Keith James, they start phoning the hospital. Is Dr. Stearns there, please? No. Oh yeah, here he is, here just down the hallway. Whoop, they'd hang up because call display hadn't been invented yet. So they called the next day, is he there? Yeah, he's here. They'd hang up. One day they called and they said, no, he's doing a heart operation, be 5 or 6 hours. They said, yes! They took Jerry Forbes' old Fargo pickup. They drove it up to the puffed wheat plant and bought a truckload of puffed wheat. They go to the University Hospital. They fill that car to the top. Top down, windows up. They fill it with puffed wheat. And away they go. I interviewed the doctor later about what happened when he came out and found his car like that. It's a long story. I don't have time to tell it to you here. But here's the important part of that story to me. We know what happened that day, but we don't know when. As broadcasters, we keep track of what the courts do, we keep track of what the police do, what the government does, what everybody else does, but sometimes we don't keep track of the important things that we do. We have even a picture of the car full of puffed wheat, but we don't know when it happened. The guy who went up and got the puffed wheat, Jim McLaughlin, I interviewed him, He can't put a year on it. He can narrow it down to a few years. The other people that were involved can't come up with a year. When we do things like this, we have to write them down. Here's another example. Vern Trail is the general manager. Roy Hennessy is a program director. And Vern is always saying to the guys, Hennessy is not like your regular program director. He doesn't always have people come to his office. He always goes out to their place. He's always gone. He's always doing stuff outside this. We don't know why he even has an office here. Hennessy goes off to Hawaii. They go to his office and take the moldings from around the door. They bring in a drywaller, and they drywall this door over. Paint it up. Hennessy comes back from Hawaii, and I talked to him about this just recently. He came back from Hawaii. It was February, but he came back Ched style because he'd been to Hawaii. He walked into the station with his Hawaiian shorts on and his flip-flops and his sunglasses and his briefcase, and walked down the hall, and gee, there's that office, and there's that office. He just left. He just left. Next day, we hear what sounds like in the hallway. Somebody's riding a dirt bike up and down the hall. Vroom, vroom. Wouldn't be uncommon for something like that to happen at Ched. Go out there. It's not a dirt bike. It's Hennessy. And he's got a chainsaw. And he makes a hole to get into the place. When he gets done, Vern Trail tells him that unfortunately, we don't have budget right now to do repairs, so the people will just have to come and climb into your office that way. When did that happen? Hennessy can't put a date on it. He can't even put a year on it. He's within a couple of years. Just another example of how we need to write things down and make sure that we know what happened and when. I help people sometimes write their life stories, and they'll show up with a shoebox full of photographs, nothing written on the back. They don't know when it was taken, they don't know why it was taken, they don't know half the people in the pictures. And so that's sort of the lesson that I'm learning for that. I owe a big thanks to Don Kay for helping us out with all the things that happened at Ched before I got there. And there's some very great stories there about the things that went on. Some things you never forget. I had a call from somebody, I think probably somebody is here. It was someone from CFRN, but I'm getting old, so I've forgotten the name. Called me the other day and said, hey, in your book, is there the story of when the police raided Ched? Yes. Not only that, we have the wire copy in the book from the day the police raided Ched, but guess what? There's no date on it. But we remember the day they came in and raided Ched because we had a pop machine that had beer in it. Police came again when Rob Christie made the world think that he'd been shot. He'd used a clip out of a cartoon for a gunshot. Had somebody scream that Rob's been shot. Police came, guns drawn. There's some concern that Rob is about to be charged with mischief because of all of this trouble. Enter Jerry Forbes. Jerry Forbes always had everybody's back. And Jerry came in and he said, look, we hire the most creative people in this city. And sometimes they get a little too creative. But if you want to see how creative Ched really is, bring us your commercials. Let us write them. He was talking about people like Daryl Hook and Gary Drager. He said, let us do that. And then he turns to Rob and he says, if you do go to jail, though, I'll bring you cookies. In the days when we were doing news and comment, there were things that I said on the air that you could never say on the air today. And there were times when people came to the station and wanted my job, and Jerry would come down and talk to me about it, and I'd say, do you want me to stop? And he'd say, I'll tell you when to stop. He said, I don't agree with what you just said, but you have to agree. It's really good radio. So he said, we'll just leave it at that. And then he would call on a Sunday afternoon just to say how much he appreciated the work that was being done in the newsroom. It wasn't just all fun and games. In the 70s, we were winning awards. We won awards for documentaries and various news things that we were done. We were written up in Alberta Report and the Journal for the type of news work that we were getting done in those days. Jerry Forbes was more than just the guy who started Santa's Anonymous. Jerry Forbes was a mentor to all of us. We loved that man. To some people, he was a personal mentor. Bruce Bowie wrote a beautiful piece for this book on what happened on Shed, what it was like the day that we had to announce that Jerry Forbes had passed away. And that's something, if you don't tear up when you read that, you're made of ice. There's an undertone in the book about women in broadcasting. Now think about how it is now. All of the strong women that we have in broadcasting today. In my career, there was a time when women were not allowed to read news. You can't have a woman reading news. What are you, crazy? What if she has to read about a murder? What if there's like an earthquake? How could a woman read about an earthquake? In Fort St. John, young women would come to the station, diploma in hand, and say to the boss, I'm looking for a job in broadcasting. And Mel would say to them, there's no place for women in broadcasting. It'll chew you up and spit you out. Best you just move along. Become a nurse or a school teacher or something like that. And I would go to him and say, Mel, I have got sisters who can do this job. Why are you being so cruel? And he said, because that's how it is in broadcasting. Women don't read news. He said, by the way, my little daughter here, he had a little daughter, Sue. She was 9 years old. And she used to come there for lunch sometimes, and she liked to hang around the studios and look at the microphones, and he got me and Len together, and he said, do not encourage Sue in any way. Not going to happen. We said, okay, we won't talk to Sue about anything. I come to Ched. There are no women reading news. It's an all-male newsroom. No one has said anything about it being wrong for women to read news. There just weren't any. And one day, Jerry Forbes got us all together, and he said, times are changing. There's a pretty strong women's movement out there. We're going to hire a woman to read the news. Now, we didn't do it right. The rest of us had been to broadcasting school. We'd been to a small market. We'd made all of our mistakes. They brought in a couple of women who were just there to, and they said, okay, you guys can train them. It was disaster. They weren't ready for that, and neither were we. And then one day, along comes a woman named Elaine MacDonald. Stan Ravendall had hired her, and she came in, and she was just super. She opened the door for all of the women who would follow at 6:30 Ched, and I interviewed her recently to see how things were going, because she left Ched after a few years, and she went down east. She went to Hamilton for a big job in eastern Canada. And you know what happened to her when she got there? The manager grabbed her and took her in his office and said, I am so angry today. My program director hired a woman. It was coast to coast. So he said, since you're here, you can read on AM, but you'll never read on this FM station. Now that wasn't that long ago. And you can see how things have changed in broadcasting. Things that we'll remember that we did on Ched that were so great. One of them was Mayor Thorpe. What a tragedy that was. 6:30 Ched was the station that broke the fact that 4 RCMP officers were dead. How did we get that story when every other media network was up there in Mayor Thorpe? It was Byron Christopher. In the simplest way possible, that he found out how those Mounties were dead. And that story needs to be told in a certain way. It needs to be told in his words. And so I'm just going to leave that, and you can read it in his words. One of the most important things we did was the police helicopter. 2 other groups had been refused a helicopter. They'd been refused by the city. They'd been refused by the police commission. They were told it was too expensive. Forget it. We're not getting a police helicopter. They were told it's not part of community policing. We don't want to do that. And so when I went on the air and did an editorial and said, why don't we have a police helicopter? The letters just started pouring in. And everyone was saying, yeah, why don't we have a police helicopter? I went on TV the next night. I was doing editorials on Global. I said, look at all these letters. Everybody wants a police helicopter, but the powers that be say no. I got a call from Ed Bean, who owns all the Crystal Glass locations. And I didn't know what he wanted, but he was a client, so I went over and had lunch with him. And he said, Bob, we need to get this helicopter. And I said, well, he says, you got to raise a couple $1 million. And I said, well, I've never raised any money. How do you do that? He says, well, you need a leader. And I said, okay. How will I get a leader? And he said, I could be the leader. I said, okay, you're the leader. What do you want to do? He wrote a check for $100,000 and laid it on the table. And he said, you can have this check. He said, if you can match it in 1 month with your listeners. Problem was, it was December. And we're busy with Santa's Anonymous and helping out the Christmas Bureau and Salvation Army and everybody else that we can. And I didn't think that was a good idea. I went to Doug Rutherford and I said, we got to talk him into a different month. So we called Ed Bean and he said, no, it had to be December. And I said to Doug, you got to think this through, Doug, because if we only raise 40 or 50,000 and then we have to, give that money back, Ched will look bad, we don't like to fail at, things like this. And Doug thought it through and he said, so if you're successful, you'll have what? And I said, well, $200,000 toward a helicopter. He says, and if we fail, Bob Layton will look bad. I said, well, okay. He says, let's do it. So we started that first morning. I did the editorial, match Ed's check. I get a call from the receptionist saying, I don't know what you did, but there's people coming in here leaving money on the table, and you better come down here. And I went down, and there was a stack of money there. Somebody was just coming through the door, dropping down a 20, and I said, hang on, I'll go find a receipt book or something. And the guy said, I don't want a receipt book. I said, I don't want a receipt. I want a police helicopter. And that's how it went, on and on and on. I at one point had a huge stack of money on my desk, and I just done an editorial telling everybody in this city that another sports group had lost all their money because they had a bookkeeper who had total access to the money, and now it's all gone. And there's me with a stack of money on my counter. I go down to accounting. I said, could you guys open a special account for this and look after it? And they said, no. Now what do? I had talked to Bob Bosilishin, the police chief, several times about getting a helicopter, and he had set up a helicopter acquisition team that the public didn't even know about to do anything they could to get this helicopter. And I called them, and they said, have you ever heard of the Edmonton Police Foundation? And I said, no. And they said, well, that's Angus Watt and Harry Hole, a couple other guys. They're raising money, and they spend it on anything that will make the city safer. They just raised a bunch of money and bought some walkie-talkies and gave them to a Citizens Patrol in Mill Woods. So why don't you call them? So Harry Mann from Crystal Glass and I go over to see Angus and Harry, and they listen to the whole thing. And I said, it's only a 1-month program. It's only like December is all it is, $100,000. And they said, okay. Not only will we provide an accountant to look after all this money, we will give everybody who donates a tax receipt. Now, when we announced that on the air, the money just came pouring in. Came to the end of December, Ed Bean wrote the $100,000 check, and I knew it was over. I knew it was over because I've been in radio a few years. I know that nothing's going to happen in January, and I was dead wrong. We started getting calls from churches and service clubs and organizations saying, we are sorry, we were busy in December, but if you want to come and speak to us now, we'll give you a check. For 18 months, I did Whirlybird Wednesdays on Global and went out and spoke several times a week. And we raised $1 million. We got the helicopter here on a lease for 1 year, and as soon as the helicopter arrived and started making arrests, the donations fell right off. People thought that was it, even though we went on the air and said, it's not it. We need another $1 million to buy it. And finally I went on the air and said, what are we going to do? And we got another stack of letters, and everybody said, have a lottery. So we did. And we raised the rest of the millions that it took to get that thing going. And so that was the thing that probably the biggest thing I've been involved in. I've been asked, am I just about out of time? I've been asked in 47 years, what is the most wonderful thing you've seen? What is the thing that you will take with you forever? And what it is the story of David Okumia. David Okumia. Who knows the name David Okumia? One person. Sometimes we say on the air, you may not know his name, but you know what he did. David Okumia's son, Hosea, fell through the ice on the Mill Creek Ravine. Remember that? The ice was 5 feet thick, but it was rotten, and the water underneath was rushing very, very fast. And of course, the rescue team came, and they started working on it. They knew that he was carried away very fast, but there was a curve in the creek, and they figured the body must be maybe jammed up in there somewhere. So they brought out all the rescue teams they had and started on this. One of the supervisors did what was the right thing. He came over and he ordered everybody off the ice. He says, it's too dangerous. It's not going to happen. Somebody's going to fall through that ice. You guys have to get off the ice. And so they did what they were told. They got off the ice. Now there's Dave Okumia standing there with a pick. I didn't know this next part because it was never reported. Nobody knew because no one was on the ice but the policeman and David Okumia. And I visited him just before I finished this book. He owns the Mikado restaurants. And I went to him and I said, what happened? What really happened? He said, I was standing in the ice. They said, get off the ice. He said, I didn't get off the ice. My son was down there. He said, a policeman walked very carefully up to me and said, you've got to come off the ice. He said, I told him I would not leave my son. The policeman, what do you think he would do at this point? Drag him off? Put handcuffs on him? He hugged him. And then he left. And when we did the story of Dave Okumia, who tied himself to a tree with a rope and kept on trying to pick through that ice, everybody responded. And people came. We're sure they must have been city workers or rescue workers. They were plain clothes, but they showed up and they dug in that ice for a week and they finally recovered the body. And for me, that was the most powerful thing that I had ever seen happen. I've told so many of these stories at conventions and things, and people have constantly said, why don't you write a book? I've calculated the stories in my book would take 4.5 hours to tell. And I've used up a half hour of your time. So that's about as far, I guess, as we can go today. I wrote this book. Partly it was supposed to be for my children and my grandchildren, so they'd have some idea of what went on in my life. I try to encourage other people to write their stories. You've all got stories that you need to write down, because when you're gone, your great-grandchildren need to know who you were. It's like Randy Travis's song, 3 Wooden Crosses. It's not what you take when you leave the world behind you, it's what you leave behind you when you go. So I have these books here for sale. These are not for me. All of the profits are going to charity, going to 630 Ched Santa's Anonymous in honor of Jerry Forbes, going to Global Television's Give Me Shelter program as a thank you for those 18 months of Early Bird Wednesdays, and to the Police Commission, or the Police Foundation rather, the Police Foundation, who look after organizations like the Zebra Child Protection Society and things like that, for all that they did to help us. So thank you for allowing me to speak here today, and write it down. Thank you.
Yeah, don't go away just yet, Bob. And the beer machine was the fall of '72. I was working in Waddminster and said, I've got to work at that station.
There you are. There you are.
I remember the story. So we have a little something for you here, the broadcasters do. Mike Sutton, you know well. He says he first met you in '74. working at CBC, and he was a staging and props director at that time. And Bob used to go and do some TV work at CBC, and it was like a Walter Winchell thing, he said, where they had a
Yes,
little beep, beep,
yes.
beep machine, and you had the fedora on, and men and women at sea and all that kind of stuff. And so that's when he first got to know you. And I don't know if you knew that Mike was an artist, but he wanted to present this to you on behalf of the Broadcasters Club. And I'm sure Marg will love this. You'll probably want this above the bed. There you go. Awesome.
Very
There you
good.
go. Bob, thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bob's books are $20, and he's also mentioned you can download it on Amazon. And if you're looking for a bargain, it's $9.95, I think, for the download. But anyway, thank you. All right.